Thank you for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for attending today's webinar. This session is focused on the sunscreen deemed final order FDA posted on September 24th, as well as the sunscreen proposed order that FDA issued on the same day. This webinar will provide an overview of OTC sunscreen drugs. It will discuss the relevant regulatory history for OTC sunscreen drugs prior to issuance of the CARES Act. It will provide an overview of OTC monograph reform. It will provide a general overview of deemed final orders for OTC monographs. It will discuss the deemed final order for OTC sunscreen drugs and also discuss the proposed order for OTC sunscreen drugs. Now, all sunscreen drugs help prevent sunburn. For those products that are labeled as broad spectrum with a sun protection factor or SPF value of 15 or higher, when used as directed with other sun protection measures, will decrease the risk of skin cancer and early skin aging caused by the sun. Sunscreen drug products are topically applied, and the active ingredients in sunscreen drugs absorb, reflect, and/or scatter radiation in the UV range. There are two regulatory pathways for marketing OTC sunscreen drugs. The first is the New Drug Application, abbreviated New Drug Application pathway, where an application is submitted to FDA for pre-market approval. The second is the OTC Drug Review, which is commonly referred to as the OTC Monograph. This pathway allows for certain OTC drugs to be marketed without an approved drug application if the drug follows the requirements in the applicable monographs and complies with statutory and regulatory requirements. This pathway began as a rulemaking process in 1972 to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of OTC drug products marketed in the United States before May 11, 1972. It established conditions under which an OTC drug is generally recognized as safe and effective, or GRACE, in the form of OTC monographs, which were embodied in regulations. Since enactment of the CARES Act on March 27, 2020, the monograph system has become an administrative order process. OTC monographs that used to be in the form of regulations are now deemed to be administrative orders. FDA can update these orders and establish new ones via a new administrative order process. OTC drugs marketed under the revamped monograph system are now subject to new statutory requirements, which include compliance with any applicable monograph order. Sunscreens have a long rulemaking history. This graphic summarizes the most relevant statutory provisions, rulemakings, and policies impacting OTC sunscreen drugs. In 1999, we published a final rule that established a sunscreen monograph under 21 CFR Part 352 with an effective date of May 21 of 2001. However, in 2000, FDA delayed the effective date for the 1999 final rule, and in 2001, FDA stayed the effective date indefinitely. For these reasons, this regulation was never in effect. On June 17 of 2011, FDA published the final rule labeling and effectiveness testing sunscreen drug products for over-the-counter human use, codified at 21 CFR 201.327, which established labeling and testing requirements for OTC sunscreen products marketed without approved applications. This rule established the labeling for SPF and broad-spectrum protection. It specified test methods for establishing SPF values and broad-spectrum protection, and also specified labeling and testing for water resistance claims. It also addressed other elements of labeling, including directions for use, and identified the types of claims that would render a covered product misbranded. The Sunscreen Innovation Act, or SIA, was enacted on November 26 of 2014 to provide an alternative process for the review of safety and effectiveness of non-prescription sunscreen active ingredients that were not listed in the 1999 state final sunscreen monograph. The SIA supplemented the FDA's time and extent application regulation with new statutory procedures. Moving to May of 2018, FDA finalized the draft enforcement policy guidance issued in 2011, describing the circumstances under which FDA intended to continue to exercise enforcement discretion with respect to certain OTC sunscreen products marketed without approved applications until a final OTC sunscreen monograph becomes effective. Finally, in February of 2019, FDA issued a proposed rule entitled Sunscreen Drug Products for Over-the-Counter Human Use. We commonly refer to this as the 2019 proposed rule. The 2019 proposed rule proposed to amend the sunscreen monograph regulation codified in 21 CFR Part 352, as well as other related regulations. The 2019 proposal aimed to bring sunscreens up to date with the latest science. The major provisions of the proposed rule include the proposed gray status of active ingredients listed in the stated 1999 final monograph, the proposed requirements related to dosage forms, the proposed maximum sun protection factor and broad spectrum requirements, the proposed labeling requirements, the proposed requirements related to final formulation testing processes and record keeping, and the proposed status of sunscreen insect repellent combination products. At the end of the comment period on the 2019 proposed rule, FDA received a significant number of comments as well as a request to defer further rulemaking on 8 active ingredients while data were being developed to support their gray status. This brings us to the CARES Act, which will be discussed on the next few slides. On March 27 of 2020, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, was enacted. This act includes important statutory provisions that reform and modernize the way OTC monograph drugs are regulated in the United States. It replaces the rulemaking process with an administrative order process to establish, revise, or amend OTC monographs. And it grants the FDA the authority to assess and collect fees from regulated industry. The CARES Act includes provisions that address OTC sunscreen drugs. It sets specific requirements for OTC sunscreen drugs marketed without an NDA to be deemed GRACE and not a new drug. It also requires FDA to issue a proposed revised sunscreen administrative order not later than 18 months following the enactment of the CARES Act, so that would have been by September 27th of this year. Now, FDA posted the deemed final order containing the GRACE requirements for OTC sunscreen drugs and the proposed sunscreen administrative order on September 24 of this year. Now, on to the deemed final order for OTC sunscreen drugs. Let's begin with the general discussion of the deemed final orders for the OTC monographs. The deemed final orders were established by the CARES Act and became effective on March 27 of 2020. They provide the current OTC monograph conditions in effect for each therapeutic category and include drugs in final monograph regulations and Category 1 drugs subject to a tentative final monograph that is the most recently applicable proposal. However, it does not include Category 1 drugs subject to an advance notice of proposed rulemaking or Category 3 drugs subject to a DFM. The deemed final order for OTC sunscreen drugs was issued as OTC Monograph M020, entitled Sunscreen Drug Products for OTC Human Use, as deemed by Section 505 GB8 and Section 505 GK2B of the FD&C Act. The deemed final order incorporates the final monograph requirements from 21 CFR Part 352 as published on May 21, 1999, except for labeling and effectiveness requirements, which come from 21 CFR 201.327, as in effect on March 26 of 2020. The deemed final order essentially preserves the pre-CARES status quo marketing conditions for sunscreens marketed without an approved drug application. We note that separate from the deemed final order, by operation of Section 505 GM2 of the FD&C Act, sunscreens in all dosage forms other than oil, lotion, cream, gel, butter, paste, ointment, stick, spray, and powder require a new drug application or abbreviated new drug application. These requirements in the DFO will remain in effect until the FDA issues another final order that will revise the DFO. FDA has posted the DFOs on the web. On September 20th of this year, FDA published a notice announcing the availability of certain DFOs. And on September 24th of this year, FDA posted the DFO for OTC sunscreen drugs in the new web portal at OTC Monographs at FDA. You can view all of the DFOs that have been posted to date at this web portal. Also, FDA withdrew the sunscreen enforcement policy guidance in conjunction with the posting of the DFO for OTC sunscreen drugs. Now, moving on to the proposed order for OTC sunscreen drugs. On September 24 of this year, FDA issued a proposed order to amend and revise the DFO for OTC sunscreen drugs. This proposed order efficiently transitions FDA's ongoing consideration of the appropriate requirements for OTC sunscreen drugs marketed without approved applications from the previous rulemaking process to the administrative order process. The proposed requirements are substantially the same as those described in the 2019 proposed rule with a few minor changes. We note the CARES Act did not change the legal and scientific standards for making a GRACE determination. This proposed order, if finalized, would replace the DFO in its entirety with new conditions under which OTC sunscreen drugs would be determined to be GRACE, and set forth certain characteristics that would establish that an OTC sunscreen drug is not GRACE. The proposed order is a proposal and does not take effect until FDA finalizes it. Now, the next couple of slides will highlight the differences between the sunscreen deemed final order and the sunscreen proposed order. Beginning with the active ingredients, the DFO considers sunscreens containing any of the 16 sunscreen active ingredients in the DFO to be GRACE. Now, the proposed order proposes that zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are GRACE for use in sunscreens. Aminobenzoic acid, commonly known as PABA, and trolamine salicylate are proposed to be not GRACE because of safety concerns. Of the remaining 12 ingredients, FDA has proposed that they are not GRACE for use in sunscreens because additional data is needed. The DFO does not include a limit on maximum SPF values, and it states that SPF labeling will be the same as the tested results. Under the proposed order, FDA has proposed a maximum labeled SPF value of SPF 60+. Although we are proposing to allow the marketing of sunscreen products formulated with SPF values up to SPF 80. Now, SPF labeling will use the lowest number in the range of tested results. So for products that are found to have an SPF value between 15 and 19, for example, the labeled SPF would be SPF 15. For products determined to have an SPF value of 40 to 49, the labeled SPF would be 40. So for broad spectrum requirements, the DFO does not require broad spectrum testing, but creates an optional broad spectrum labeling claim and broad spectrum testing that is required for inclusion of this claim on the labeling. The proposed order proposes that all sunscreens with SPF values of 15 and above must satisfy broad spectrum requirements, including a proposed new requirement that a broad spectrum product meet a UVA1 to UV ratio of 0.7 or higher. For dosage forms, the DFO itself does not address the GRACE status of sunscreens in specific dosage forms. However, as discussed previously, by operation of Section 505 GM2 of the FD&C Act, sunscreens in all dosage forms other than those listed here can only be marketed with an NDA or ANDA. In the proposed order, GRACE dosage forms for sunscreens include oils, lotions, creams, gels, butters, pastes, ointments, and sticks. Sprays are also proposed to be GRACE. However, they are subject to particle size restrictions, flammability testing, and related safety labeling requirements. Powders have been proposed to be not GRACE due to insufficient data. And we note that the proposed order does not propose to change the new drug status of sunscreens in all other dosage forms. Now moving on to Principal Display Panel or PDP labeling. The DFO has the same labeling requirements that have been in effect for sunscreen products since 2011. Under the proposed order, FDA has proposed to revise the Statement of Identity requirements, proposing that an alphabetical listing of active ingredients followed by sunscreen and the product's dosage form be included on the PDP. Sunscreens with an SPF below 15 are required to include the SPF statement on the PDP followed by an asterisk, which leads to a statement directing consumers to see the skin cancer skin aging alert in the DFL. Finally, font and placement changes were proposed to ensure SPF, broad spectrum, and water resistant statements stand out. So moving on to final formulation testing and record keeping. The DFO does not address record keeping. The proposed order proposes that records of required final formulation testing of sunscreen products should be maintained for 1 year after the product expiration date, or if the product is exempt from expiration dating for 3 years after distribution of the last lot labeled in reliance on that testing. Responsible persons are required to keep records of sunscreen formulation testing. And the proposed order clarifies that required records would be subject to FDA inspection. The DFO does not address sunscreen insect repellent combinations. Under the proposed order, FDA has proposed these products are not GRACE because of incompatibilities between FDA and EPA labeling requirements, which prevent these products from being labeled in a manner that sufficiently ensures safe and effective use of the sunscreen component and provides adequate directions for use. Now, the proposed order does not represent a conclusion by FDA that the 12 sunscreen active ingredients proposed as needing additional data are unsafe for use in OTC sunscreen drugs. FDA has requested the additional information on these active ingredients so we can evaluate their GRACE status considering changed conditions of use such as substantially increased sunscreen drug use and therefore increased exposure to sunscreens by consumers, and evolving information about their potential risks. Now, the public comment period for the proposed order ends on December 27th of this year. The public comment period affords an opportunity for the public to submit information that has become available since the closure of the comment period for the 2019 proposed rule. FDA will consider timely comments on the 2019 proposed rule to be constructively submitted to the proposed order. Therefore, comments that have already been submitted to the 2019 proposed rule do not have to be resubmitted to the proposed order for consideration. After reviewing and considering the comments, FDA will issue a final order. By law, the effective date of that order will not be earlier than 1 year after the agency issues the final order. If at any time the available evidence becomes sufficient to resolve the uncertainty as to the GRACE status of any of the 12 sunscreen active ingredients that we have requested more data for, FDA intends to issue a final order on the ingredient. But the agency may defer issuance of a revised final order on the GRACE status of sunscreens containing one of these ingredients if we see progress on development of needed data. On the next slide, I will discuss the conditions under which FDA would be prepared to issue a deferral. If available data at the close of the comment period does not resolve outstanding questions, but FDA receives satisfactory indication of timely and diligent progress on the necessary studies for a specific ingredient, FDA may initially defer issuance of a revised final order on the GRACE status of sunscreens containing that particular active ingredient. This deferral would not be for more than 1 year. However, depending on further satisfactory progress with the studies, the deferral may be extended. If, however, the studies do not appear to be proceeding in a timely manner or otherwise do not appear productive, FDA expects to proceed with issuance of a final order on sunscreens containing that ingredient. Sun safety is important for everyone, regardless of skin tone. Americans can reduce risks from sun exposure with continued use of sun protection measures, including broad-spectrum sunscreen with SPF values of at least 15. For questions on the deemed final order or the proposed order for OTC sunscreen drugs, you can email FDA at druginfo@fda.hhs.gov. If you have questions on OTC monograph reform, you can use the same druginfo email address. If you have user fee questions, please email cedarcollections@fda.hhs.gov. For meeting requests, use monograph meeting requests at fda.hhs.gov. And if you have small business or industry assistance questions, email us at cedarsbia@fda.hhs.gov. On this slide, we provide some resources related to the recent sunscreen actions and to OTC monograph reform in general. Thank you for your attention and your attendance at today's OTC Sunscreen Products webinar.
Thank you for the great presentation. We'll now transition into our Q&A panel session. If you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now, and here's the first question for Dr. Adah. And it's a general question about the OTC Monograph website. I'm unable to find all monographs. An example is the anti-caries monograph. Can you provide some more insight?
Yes, thank you. So as a resource for the public, FDA is posting deemed final orders in batches as they become available. Because DFOs were deemed legislatively by the CARES Act, they are in effect as of March of 2020, whether or not they are posted.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have some more questions coming in, and here's the next question. Do we need to update all entries in DailyMed to state that the marketing category has changed from OTC Monograph Not Final to OTC Monograph Final?
Thanks, Ray. Yes, entries can be updated to read OTC Monograph Final.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question on particle sizes. What are the allowed particle sizes?
So that's a good question. At the moment, FDA has not established final particle size limits for sprays. In the proposed order, FDA has proposed spray products should not admit particle sizes below 1 micrometer.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question on SPF. And here's the question. For products tested to SPF 60 to 80, does that mean the label can only state 60 plus, or does the FDA allow for SPF 70, etc.? We just want to confirm we understand that labeling would require a default back to SPF 60.
So the deemed final order does not have SPF limitations. In the proposed order, FDA has proposed that the maximum labeled SPF is 60 plus. So if a product was tested to have an SPF of 70, it would be labeled 60 plus. Thank you.
Looks like we have some more questions coming in, and here's the next question for Dr. Adah. When the proposed order is finalized, how long does industry have to comply with the newly issued final order? Is there possibly a transition period that's defined?
So in the final order, FDA expects to define when the final order goes into effect. So keep an eye out for that final order.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions coming in. And here's the next question. I really don't understand whether octocrylene can be used in 2022 onwards or not. Can you be so kind as to clarify?
Certainly. So the deemed final order lists octocrylene as a grace ingredient for sunscreens. Octocrylene may be marketed in monograph sunscreens unless FDA issues a final order changing that status. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few more questions coming in. And the next one deals with current requirements for sunscreens. And here's the question. Where can I find the current requirements for sunscreen?
Thank you. So the deemed final order for OTC sunscreens provides the current OTC monograph conditions that are in effect and can be found at OTC Monographs at FDA. This is in effect until FDA finalizes the proposed order. Now, marketed sunscreens must comply with all conditions in this OTC monograph. Essentially, this was what was in effect before the CARES Act passed. Thanks.
Thanks for responding to that question. We're having a few more questions coming in and giving our reviewers a time to review that. And here's the next question. When does the FDA anticipate issuing a deemed final order on the recently proposed order?
That's a good question. So deemed final orders were established by Congress as part of the CARES Act. FDA anticipates issuing an order finalizing the proposed order after we have reviewed all of the comments for the proposed order. Now, the comment period for the proposed order is open until December 27th. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question coming in, and it deals with proposed orders. And here's the question. If the proposed order is passed and finalized, would the current final order be updated to include the proposed order, or will there be two final orders, one of the existing and one with the proposed order?
So if finalized, the proposed order would replace the deemed final order in its entirety. So there would be just the one.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions coming in. It deals with DFOs. And here's the question. Do we follow the DFO or the proposed?
I'm sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties here.
That's all right. Just to remind our audience, if you haven't submitted your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows, and it looks like we do have a few more questions coming in. Back over to Dr.
Okay, thank you. If I remember correctly, the question is for sprays, do we follow the deemed final order requirements until the final order is issued? I may have missed the question. If you could repeat it, please.
And here's the question. Do we follow the DFO or the proposed?
At the moment, you should be following the deemed final order. The proposed order does not become into effect until it is itself finalized.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we do have some more questions coming in. And here's the next question for Dr. Adah. Can you provide any indication on how much time FDA will need to review comments after the closure of the extended comment period? For example, when is the next final order likely to be available?
So the review period will be based on the volume and substantiveness of the comments received. And if I remind you, the previous question that we answered, we noted that the comment period does not close until December 27th. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question that came out about SPFs, and here it is. Will SPFs currently on the market need to be relabeled utilizing the proposed rule once finalized?
So when FDA issues a final order, it will replace the DFO in its entirety. Manufacturers will need to follow the labeling requirements in that final order. Thanks.
Thanks for providing clarification on that. And we have a question regarding sprays, and here's the question. For sprays, do we follow the DFO requirements until the revised final order is issued?
Thanks for the question. For OTC sunscreen products without an approved drug application, manufacturers should continue to comply with the deemed final order until the revised final order is issued. Thanks.
Thank you for providing clarification on that question. And here's another question in regards to the webinar presentation. In the webinar, the FDA slide shows that the end of the comment period is 12/27/2021. However, prior FDA comment period ending date was 11/12/2021. Why is there a difference?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So FDA extended the public comment period, and that explains the difference. Thanks.
Thanks so much for providing that clarification. We do have another question in regards to dates, and here's the question. Does this mean that after 12/27/2021, we will have a DFO?
So the DFO is already in effect as of passage of the CARES Act. It can be viewed at OTC Monographs at FDA.
Thanks for providing that update. And we're getting a few more questions that are coming in that we're reviewing right now. And here is the next question. Can I market a sunscreen and a spray?
Yes, you can. Apart from the deemed final order, under 505 GM2 of the Act, sunscreens in oil, lotion, cream, gel, butter, paste, ointment, stick, spray, and powder can be marketed. Anything else needs to have a new drug application. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions coming in. And here's the next question. What ingredients are allowed under the OTC monograph for sunscreen?
So the deemed final order includes 16 active ingredients. These are the same ingredients proposed in the 1999 rule and in effect before the CARES Act was passed. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for providing that clarification. We do have a few more questions coming in right now. And here's the next question. Is the sunscreen enforcement policy guidance still in effect?
No, FDA withdrew the guidance in conjunction with the posting of the deemed final order for OTC sunscreens.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question coming in. And here's the question. Under the proposed order, the only GROS ingredients are zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. What about the other ingredients?
So for the other ingredients, additional data is needed. This doesn't mean that FDA has decided these ingredients are unsafe. FDA needs the additional information so that we can elevate their grace status and consider change conditions. FDA needs to look at evolving information, especially the substantial use and exposure by consumers and any involving information about their potential risks. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for responding to that question. And here's the next question. What is FDA telling the public about sunscreens that contain ingredients proposed to not be GROS in the proposed order?
So while additional data are being gathered, consumers should continue to use broad-spectrum sunscreens, SPF 15 or higher, along with other sun protective measures. Thank you.
Thank you for providing that clarification. We do have another question. Does FDA allow marketing of loose powder sunscreen product under the CARES Act?
So under the CARES Act, powder sunscreens are permitted. In the proposed order, FDA proposed that powdered dosage forms are not GRACE and that they need additional data. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question about registering sunscreens, and here's the question. So from now on, in order to register sunscreen as an OTC drug, do we need to follow the DFO?
Yes, so the current OTC monograph conditions can be found in the DFO, and this will remain in effect until FDA finalizes the proposed order. Thank you. It's good.
Thank you for responding to that question. And we do have a couple more questions coming in. And if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions, please do so at this time in the Q&A chat pod. And here's the next question. There are two sections within the website, OTC Monograph and Administrative Orders. What is the difference?
So the administrative order includes a summary and background information, including the regulatory history about the monograph. For ease of reference, FDA separated the individual OTC monographs embodied by final orders under Section 505GB of the FD&C Act without any sections that accompany the monograph, such as the background section. Yeah, it can be a little confusing, so thank you for.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have more questions coming in that are being reviewed. And here's the next question. Why did FDA propose to restrict particle size and
So we propose to restrict particle size in sprays to address inhalation safety issues. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have more questions rolling in. And here's the next question. Do I have to follow the conditions in the proposed order for sunscreens that was published on September 24th, 2020?
No, you do not. The current OTC monograph conditions are in the deemed final order for sunscreens, and this is still in effect until FDA finalizes the proposed order. Thank you.
Thanks for responding to that question. Our next question is the following. Do products SPF 15 and above now have to also be broad spectrum?
So under the deemed final order, this is optional. However, FDA has proposed in the proposed order that all products with SPF 15 and above be broad spectrum. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for responding to that questions. We do have a couple more questions that are being evaluated, see if they're part of the scope of the presentation right now. So we'll just take a momentary pause so that we can take a look at those questions. And we will be right back momentarily once we get to consider those. I believe we just had another question come in. Let me just quickly read that out. There we are. My document repopulated. And here's the question. FDA already asked for safety data for the 12 non-GRACE ingredients. Why is the FDA asking the industry to provide data again for these 12 ingredients? Seems very repetitive.
So the CARES Act changed the way OTC monograph drugs were regulated while sunscreen regulations were in process. The CARES Act directed FDA to issue a proposed order. So FDA is using the proposed order as a mechanism to transition from the former rulemaking process to the new administrative order process. So thanks for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. We're just evaluating a few more questions to see if they're within the scope of the presentation. And we will be right back after we get just a few moments to do that. Looks like we're able to get another question evaluated. And here's the next question. Can you confirm that the GRAS status of zinc oxide and titanium oxide includes both the nano and the non-nano versions?
Thanks, Ray. Yes, the DFO includes both nano and non-nano formulations, of zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. In addition, FDA proposes in the proposed order that both zinc and titanium nano and non-nano forms are GRAS-y. So thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We're waiting to evaluate it just a few more just to see if they're within the scope of the presentation just currently. And so we will be right back once we get an opportunity to evaluate those. So we'll take a momentary pause. All right, well, I'm getting the signal from the central that we are wrapping up asking questions at this time. And so we wanted to thank Dr. Adah for their very informative and timely talk and also for responding to numerous questions that came in.